Hey everybody, Joseph Rothschild here, aka MBT, and today we're talking about competitive Yu-Gi-Oh! So if you want to play Yu-Gi-Oh! At anything resembling a bigger than local level, your options are either to use Master Duel or check out the paper product. For the former, competitive play opportunities are pretty well defined. For a long time, it was just the MCS. But these days, Konami has rolled out not only a legitimate pathway to Worlds through the Cup system, but also the Challenger Cups, which give a more tournament-style experience instead of just letting you endlessly grind a ladder. If you're interested in paper, however, you've got a lot more options. Of course, I'm sure you're all familiar with the opportunities available at your local OTS store, both the tournaments that are usually held regularly as well as championship events. Higher level play extends to things like regionals, nationals, worlds, and of course, YCSes. But YCSes are currently in a bit of a crisis. I don't even know if I can really call it a crisis because they're still happening depending on where you live. I just don't really understand why they're being managed the way that they are, what the end goal for Konami is, or if they're even gonna stick around. They face kind of two compounding crises. Firstly, there haven't been YCSes announced in Europe for like a really disturbing amount of time. And secondly, the community has been in its feelings this week about the lack of coverage at the YCSes that do occur. So today we're going to ask the question, what the hell is going on with YCSes? And let's begin with a brief history of them. So pre-2010, when Upper Deck Entertainment had a significant amount of rights relative to Yu-Gi-Oh!, they ran these things called the Shonen Jump Championship Series events. At the time, these were like the big boys of competitive expertise, and a lot of the individuals that are powerhouses these days cut their teeth at those events. When all that legal nastiness occurred, Upper Deck lost the ability to host these events. And almost immediately with the closure of the Shonen Jump Championship events with what else but SJC Edison, YCS Washington debuted just a couple of months later, run by Konami. YCSs are run in every single TCG region, which includes, of course, the United States, Canada, Mexico, all of LATAM, and also Oceania, but Europe as well, in theory. As someone who's been to a number of these events, they are a ton of fun. Depending on the location, they can draw anywhere from about 300 to 3,000 competitors, and usually it ends up being something like a 9 to 13 round tournament held over the course of 2 days for a top cut depending on the size of the entry. Over the course of those 2 days, if you scrub out early, which I would never do, you can enter really cool side events like Giant Cards, Winamats, Time Wizard, Rivalry of Warlords, and above all, they're really great opportunities to just feel the community aspect of the game. One of the most important parts of playing Yu-Gi-Oh! Is being around Yu-Gi-Oh! Players, and it's so nice to share a space with individuals who, at minimum, have one thing in common with you for an entire weekend. I guess I'll ask the stupid question, which is, why do these exist at all? So now that we've talked about what a YCS is, let's talk about their justification. This next portion is complete hearsay, but every person that I've spoken to that's been even remotely involved in running these events has pretty much exactly this to say. YCSs cost a ton of money. It's a huge bureaucratic nightmare to run an event like this, and they almost never end up in the black. That's because outside of the minimal entry that you have to pay to enter a YCS, you basically got a captive audience in a big warehouse for an entire weekend not purchasing your product. They're playing with cards they already have. They don't need to buy new ones. And in order to host these events at all, you have to be able to pay an enormous judging staff, rental fees on the location, you've got to get food in there, you've got to get vendors in there, and often you have to get broadcasting in there as well. So if these events aren't really turning a profit, why are they being run? Well, firstly, it kind of justifies paper play. If there's not a robust tournament structure surrounding Yu-Gi-Oh!, why buy the cards? There's a comparative tournament scene in Master Duel. Playing with digital pieces of paper is just as good as playing with physical pieces of paper if there's no reason to go out and play against anyone else in person. I've seen this floated a lot as to the reason the YCSs exist in the first place, but it doesn't really ring true for me. From my perspective, if YCSs disappeared tomorrow, there would already be a justification for paper play, and that is the rest of the tournament scene. You're still going to have locals, you're still going to have OTS champs. There's even like a progression to doing well in these events. You test at your locals so you can go to your regionals in your area. You do well at your regionals so you can qualify to make it to the national tournament. That national tournament, which is functionally just a YCS with only good players, could theoretically get you to Worlds. Like, there's already tons of opportunities for paper play that build upon each other and keep you invested. YCSs are just this weird, huge additional tournament that happens every couple of months. The second reason, and in my opinion the more compelling reason that people think YCSs have stuck around, is that they are a really good advertisement. Regionals are fine, but you cram 50 to 400 people into a hall the size of a Waffle House, and after about 10 rounds, you're going to see some shit. Players are tired, they're cranky, they're playing a whole bunch of rounds in a singular day. There's real concrete stakes to it. For a lot of players, topping a YCS feels kind of perpetually out of reach just because of how few slots are afforded. But at a regional, if you get like in the top quarter of people who entered, usually you can punch your card for an invite. There's not always food available, so people are hangry and cranky. Inversely, YCSs, as a huge celebration of all things Yu-Gi-Oh!, almost always feature people who are happy to be there, either buying cards, cards, or playing in side events, or scrubbing out of the main, talking about Yu-Gi-Oh!, interacting with it, and chilling with their friends. It's a fantastic opportunity for Konami to generate a whole bunch of stuff that will eventually go in an ad for the product. Look at all these people hanging out and enjoying Yu-Gi-Oh! Together. Look at all these top players competing against each other. Check out how the new cards have impacted the metagame and what people are doing with them. You're permitted to take a huge loss on these events because essentially you're just paying for a huge ad. But if that's the justification for a YCS, why isn't there coverage of many of them? This discussion has been brewing over the last couple of weeks, and it's kind of reached a boiling point just because of what happened at the most recent YCS in Rio. Christian Urena, now the duelist with the most YCS tops of any other, was returning to his third consecutive YCS after winning the previous two back-to-back. That shit, never happens, by the way. I think one other person has ever done it, and it's exactly Billy Brake, but Christian was looking to do the unthinkable and go back-to-back-to-back, a feat that had never been accomplished. Looking to prevent him from doing so were some of the greatest Yu-Gi-Oh! Players of all time that had also made the trip. Some from the area, but many on flights, hoping to test their mettle against the best of the best. This was also the first YCS that Legacy of Destruction was legal, a proving grounds for one of the scariest decks in modern memory, Tenpai Dragon, as well as an extremely powerful engine in Melodious. 5 or 6 Yu-Gi-Oh! Plot lines were all converging around this one event, and the weekend of Rio, we all just sort of had to refresh a Lampy post on Twitter. There was no broadcasting there, which is pretty typical for Latin American YCSs. There was no paper reporting, which is frustrating. Coverage on the webpage was just 10 consecutive rounds of standings and then the winner post. This is part of a pattern in YCS coverage in recent years. Tons of events, even the ones that are hosted in the United States, don't have broadcasting attached to them. Occasionally that's for logistical reasons. Some locations have a state law that prevents broadcasting except by individuals with union accreditation, and Konami has an in-house team that they port between states and occasionally countries that isn't unionized because they're freelancers or ICs. And if a YCS isn't in the United States, they don't really want to fly out individuals to do written coverage of those events. But why? They're already taking a loss on these events. If the purpose is to be an ad, what use is the ad if no one sees what's happening? I just expected that they would start with the broadcast elements and work backwards from there, building the event around the ability to generate footage. When this was brought up on Twitter, a lot of people started saying things like, well, attendance is still high. And yeah, that's true. But I don't think this is a case of Konami seeing what they can get away with. I think the explicit purpose of these events is to do something they're just not doing for some reason. Whatever's irking North American duelists about the lack of coverage, of course, pales in comparison to what's going on in EU territories, which is nothing. There's been no YCSs for months, no announcement of upcoming YCSs for the new season. They're just kind of without an understanding of what's going on relative to competitive organized play. This all culminated in the announcements for upcoming YCSs in the post-national season, one of which hasn't even been decided on yet. YCSs are a unique and exciting part of the Yu-Gi-Oh! Experience. They're one of the last things in this godforsaken world that we can all get together and do in person as one group of people with a shared interest. But recently, I just don't know what's going on with them. I think their purpose as a justification for paper play is filled in elsewhere, and their purpose as an advertisement is severely diminished by the fact that we are getting no coverage, and we don't know if any are ever going to be held in the EU ever again. I would hate to see something as interesting and engaging as competitive Yu-Gi-Oh! And the stories it creates take a back seat to the whims of a bunch of board members. And I hope that we get coverage soon and Joshua Schmidt gets another couple of wins under his belt, I guess. That's it. See ya.